What's up, everyone? This is FP Sticks. Today, I want to talk about reading teams and how to bring in a solid line of three. If you're like me, especially with this Fusion Cup, this was one of the cups where it was incredibly difficult to read your opponent's team and kind of figure out a solid line of three because so much of this cup was based on whether or not you won that lead matchup. So I thought I would maybe just go through my thought process of how I read my opponent's teams and how I construct my line of three Pokemon from that reading. And I'll kind of be commentating over this tournament recap here. This was one of the remote tournaments I was in, and I swept it 4-0. Nice way to win out the month because I didn't sweep near as many tournaments this month. Fusion was kind of rough, but a lot of good battles. So my first opponent here is Big Wheelin' Now, whenever you look at your opponent's line of six, you want to try to first identify if there's any glaring weaknesses in their team. For example, if there's any one of your Pokemon that has 4 or more positive matchups against their team. Now, against a lot of like the top level players and stuff, it's going to be very hard to find a solid weakness in their team. But in Big Wheelin' team, I identified that Empoleon was going to kind of be my MVP to go against his team. It has very favorable matchups against Charizard, Noctowl, Frostlass, and Bronzong. So there's 4 out of 6 right there. So I know that I really want to construct my line of 3 around Empoleon. Against Whiscash, that's kind of a so-so matchup. I never end up winning that every time I'm in that scenario. But so this first line of 3 I constructed, I used Empoleon as the lead because statistically it is the safest lead, knowing that it has 4 out of 6 of the matchups. Then you need to correctly identify what that lead Pokemon's biggest weakness is going to be. So looking at Big Wheelin' team, I know that Venusaur is going to be kind of the most solid wall to my Empoleon. So I actually ran with Empoleon, Charizard, and Noctowl in my first line of 3 here. What this allowed me to do was if he did lead Venusaur, I had 2 options in the back that I could switch into to still protect my Empoleon. So that was an example where I constructed my line of 3 with the Pokemon that had the most positive matchups, and then I heavily supported that Pokemon. So I supplied it with 2 flyers that would be able to beat Venusaur, and Noctowl can handle Whiscash, and I know Charizard can handle Frostlass and Venusaur and Bronzong, so it ended up working out. In the second round, I do the exact same thing because I really want to exploit this Empoleon weakness. Again, I just need to avoid the Venusaur, and I know that Empoleon will really lead me to victory. So let's start like commentating on what's going on over here. Charizard against Venusaur. I know that this is very favorable for me. I'm going to let this Sludge Bomb go through and then commit to farming it down. Whatever comes in, I'm going to hit with the Blast Burn to either draw the last shield or do an amazing amount of damage. It is a Noctowl and he shields it up. Correct play on his part. And I go for a Dragon Claw here. Just trying to get some chip damage before this Noctowl takes me out. But now I switch into my Empoleon with a stored Hydro Cannon. And I'm going to throw this right away. It takes out the Noctowl. In the back is Bronzong. Empoleon's going to have another favorable matchup against this. So this is very solid for me. As long as Empoleon avoids that Venusaur in the even energy scenario, I'm totally okay. Against Whiscash, I know I can beat it, but only if I have an energy advantage. So that's where Empoleon as the lead would not be as comfortable within that matchup. My Noctowl is going to be able to come in and just wing attack down this Bronzong. Now for the third round, or the third game here before it starts, I run the same team, but I do kind of a gamble approach with this. So same line of 3, but this time I'm going to lead Noctowl. So I go Noctowl, Empoleon, and Charizard. And this is kind of what I call the gamble approach, where you're going to use your MVP Pokemon as a safe switch. But I also ran this line of 3 suspecting that he would bring in Venusaur this time because of how much work my Empoleon was putting in on his team. So I did correctly get the lead there, which is really good for me. Huge mistake right here. I let this Blast Burn go through, and yeah, it takes out the Empoleon. That's okay, though. So that's kind of the gamble approach, especially with this cup. Every time you chose a lead, it was going to be a gamble, and it could be a very costly gamble if you don't win out that lead scenario. But I wanted to maintain that line of 3 because I knew that that was going to be my key to success against his team. And then recognizing that Empoleon was just doing so much work to his team, I assumed that he would have been bringing in Venusaur this time. And so I was able to recognize that and catch that lead. Again, it's all chance based on whether or not you're going to get that lead or not, but there are some mind games that are in play when you're selecting that. So we're in the Noctowl mirror match here. I did farm up a lot of energy, so I'm going to throw this Sky Attack. I get the last shield there. I'm up 2 shields here still. Wondering what he has in the back. I am going to let this go through. And I'm going to give my Charizard 2 shields here. Because a Charizard with 2 shields, I'm pretty sure can handle anything on his team. Even against that Whiscash, the Whiscash would have to land a Blizzard to take me out. So he'd have to do some very successful shield baiting. I go for Dragon Claw because it's in Dragon Claw range. I have stored energy. Oh, and in the back is that Venusaur that we saw in the lead matchup. So I'm going to be able to confidently take this with a Blast Burn. Good game there, Big Wheelin' Yo. Going into the second round, this is going to be up against Unassigned Seat. And once his team gets pulled up on the screen there, yeah, there we go. The first game, I bring in Empoleon, Shiftry, and Bronzong. So here's an example of a team that doesn't have like 4 glaring weaknesses to it. Not a single one of my Pokemon has 4 positive matchups. And this is what you are going to encounter in a lot of people's teams, especially in the Fusion Cup, because there were so many types that were allowed in there. So I had to gamble a little bit. I led with Empoleon because I know that Empoleon's going to have favorable matchups against his Bronzong, his Noctowl, and his Charizard, and it's going to go neutral with his Empoleon. So kind of 3.5 safe matchups there. Empoleon is going to be weak to that Whiscash and Venusaur. So I brought in Shiftry to handle the Whiscash. Shiftry's also going to be able to handle the Bronzong and his Empoleon, as well as I brought in Bronzong to handle the Venusaur. That's something that I'm going to be very afraid of, is that Venusaur. And so with that line of 3 that I constructed, I'm able to cover all 6 of his Pokemon. That's an extremely important thing when you are constructing your line of 3. You want to make sure that the 3 Pokemon that you bring in, you have coverage for every single Pokemon on their team. Don't leave a single one out. Way too risky to do that. So you want to make sure you have coverage for all 6 Pokemon. And again, since Empoleon kind of had 3.5 favorable matchups here, I led with it. So let's kind of see. I'm able to take that first match there. In the second game, I'm going with the exact same team, but this time I'm going to lead my Shiftry. I'm anticipating him possibly leading with his Whiscash, but he leads with his Empoleon, so this is still favorable for me. If he would have led with the Venusaur, I would have been in a very tricky scenario here, because as you can see, Shiftry and Empoleon are weak to Venusaur. So I would have had to switch in my Bronzong, or even leave my Shiftry in on that opening match and maybe commit 2 shields and go straight foul play, because that was going to be really rough if I would have lost the lead, because I had 2 things weak to Venusaur. When constructing your line of 3, it's going to be fairly typical that you're going to have 2 of those 3 Pokemon somewhat weak to one of their Pokemon. So again, that's kind of where the chance occurs within this. You just want to try to get lucky with that lead, and hopefully you have enough coverage. If you do catch the worst case scenario lead, Sometimes you just have to sacrifice that first Pokemon or switch in your counter to it and hope that they don't meet it with a hard counter. If I did use Bronzong as my switch in there, if he would have led Venusaur and I switched in my Bronzong, he could have brought in his Whiscash to threaten it or his Empoleon. But both of those things, he could have brought in his Charizard as well. Both of those things against a Bronzong with an energy advantage, they're still going to have favorable matchups, but not like a totally hard wall favorable matchup because Bronzong's Confusion and Psyshock damage would still do really well. So I have my Bronzong against his Noctowl here. This is a very favorable matchup for Bronzong, but you do have to watch out for the Nightshade. It's going to be hitting you for super effective damage. I switch into my Shiftry because I wanted to be able to get off a foul play. So I will commit my last shield here. He has to dump his energy into the Shiftry, and now I'm going to be able to land this foul play. It's not going to be able to take out the Noctowl. And my Snarl damage isn't enough. In comes my Bronzong. I just need this Confusion to register. If this is a Nightshade, he actually has won this match. But it's only a Sky attack, and I barely survive it. The Confusion registers, and he goes down. So going into round 3, I call I call this approach the unexpected lead. Unexpected lead, because I lead with Poliwrath. I bring in Poliwrath, Empoleon, and Bronzong. This is an extremely risky approach, this unexpected lead approach, but it has won me some matchups against some higher level players. So I call it the unexpected lead because Poliwrath only has good matchups against Whiscash and Empoleon. Only 2 out of the 6. So statistically, I'm not very likely to bring in Poliwrath, and definitely not very likely to bring it in as a lead. So this is where the mind games kind of play in. Again, this is pretty risky, so I cannot safely recommend that you take this approach. Luckily, I had already won the 2 previous games, so I was able to try this out and see if it worked. Yeah, Poliwrath is going to have favorable matchups against the Whiscash and Empoleon, but everything else is not the best matchup for Poliwrath. So this approach definitely has won me matches in the past. If I remember correctly, in this particular game, I don't think I actually caught a favorable lead. But sometimes you do catch that favorable lead because they don't anticipate you bringing in that particular type. I've gone against people in this Fusion Cup that have run double grass, and that applies a lot of bench pressure to scare off your water types like my Empoleon. But I led Empoleon anyways in some of those matchups, and they didn't lead grass because they thought that the bench pressure was enough. So, risky approach, but you just got to make sure that you have coverage for everything in the back. Yeah, so in that line, let me check my notes here. I ran the Poliwrath, Empoleon, and Bronzong. So, kind of risky because, again, I had 2 things weak to Venusaur, but luckily I was able to take out that matchup. All right, round 3 is up against Clarinet Monster. My wife, Katie, you see her on the channel all the time. She had a very favorable record against me this month for Fusion Cup. The first round, I'm going Poliwrath, Empoleon, and Shiftry as my line of 3. Now, looking at her team, Altaria is going to have just a lot of really good matchups. Her Altaria is going to beat Charizard, Noctowl. It can beat my Empoleon pretty comfortably if I'm not able to land the Flash Cannon. Beats my Shiftry, and it honestly beats my Bronzong too in the 0 and 2 shield scenario, I believe. So I really need to watch out for that Altaria. Another tip that I would recommend you guys do is when you're reading teams, don't just read your opponent's team from your perspective. Read your own team from your opponent's perspective to kind of see what they might be thinking is going to be a good answer to your team. So I knew the Altaria was coming in, and so that's why I went with the Poliwrath lead there. Because Poliwrath has a very favorable matchup against Altaria in the even shield and scenario, even shield and energy scenario. So that's why I led with it. And then I brought in Empoleon and Shiftry because Poliwrath is going to be really weak to her Ninetales and Bronzong. And so Empoleon covers those two, and the Shiftry is going to handle the Quagsire and the Bronzong really well. I did not have a whole lot of coverage for Charizard in this line of 3, and as you can see, this was actually what's going to cost me this first match here. I did not account for Charizard very well. Her Charizard's able to farm me down here, and my Empoleon, even with my stored energy, is going to be taken out by this Charizard with the Blast Burn. So she takes that first game. Very good game there. In the second round, I'm going to adapt a little bit. I want to keep my Empoleon in here, but I'm going to bring in Empoleon, Poliwrath, and Noctowl. So instead of bringing in Shiftry, I'm going to bring in Noctowl because that has a slightly better matchup against the Altaria, and it provides me a little bit more of a buffer against her Alolan Ninetales, so I don't have two things weak to her Alolan Ninetales. So in that lead scenario, it would have been favorable for me, but only if I could have landed that Flash Cannon. So I stayed in there, I farmed up with my Empoleon, I wanted her to dump her Sky Attack energy, and then I switched into my Poliwrath because I wanted my Poliwrath to be on an even energy scenario. I do commit a shield here. She is going to switch in her Shiftry, so this leads me to believe that she must not have brought in her Alolan Ninetales in this line. Thank goodness, because now my Poliwrath with all the stored energy is going to be able to do some work against her team. Go for the Ice Punch bait here because she is up in shields, and now I'm going for the Dynamic Punch. She's either going to have to commit her last shield or this Shiftry is going to go down. Shiftry does go down. But I still have a fairly healthy Poliwrath here. She brings back in her Altaria. I'm able to get to this Ice Punch before the Altaria can get to a Sky Attack. That's huge. Either going to draw the last shield, or she lets the Altaria go. What's in the back? It's her Charizard. So I want to get off this Ice Punch, and then I'll probably make a fast swap. I want that last shield gone. There goes the shield. I'm actually staying in here, and then I switch into my Empoleon. Because I farmed up energy in that opening matchup, my Empoleon is able to throw a Hydro Cannon and take that second match, that second game. So good adaptation on my part, bringing in Noctowl instead of Shiftry. For the final round here, I'm going to go Empoleon, Poliwrath, and Charizard. She keeps leading with that Altaria. Which is very smart on her part because it has so many favorable matchups against my team. I can only win out this scenario if I land the Flash Cannon, and honestly, it's a little too risky for what I'm comfortable with, so I'm going to play this the same way. Farm up with my Empoleon, and now I've switched into my Poliwrath. I am down a shield, but her Altaria is still staying in this, which again makes me think, okay, maybe she didn't bring in Alolan Ninetales this time. Or her Bronzong. I am going to shield up this Sky Attack. Go for my own Ice Punch here. This is going to put a lot of shield pressure on the Altaria. Altaria is going to faint after 2 Ice Punches, and you can definitely outpace the Altaria to its charge moves. Here comes the Ice Punch again. No shield. We're still even on shields here. So what does she have in the back that she did not switch into my Poliwrath? Out comes Charizard. I'm going to put on a lot of shield pressure with these Ice Punches. They're only going to be hitting for neutral, but these are definitely going to add up. And it's very hard to farm down Poliwrath with Fire Spin. So she is going to dump her energy here. Just a Dragon Claw, but it's enough to take me out. Because I stored that energy in my Empoleon again, I'm going to be able to one-shot this Charizard with the Hydro Cannon. And she's got Shiftry in the back, so I need to get out of there right away. No matter what, even though that Shiftry got 1 Snarl's worth of energy advantage on me, I'm going to shield the first charge move. She does correctly bait me, which is great on her part, but I would still survive the foul play. So I'm able to land this Blast Burn and actually take the win here. I'm finally able to get some revenge on Katie because she's been beating me so much this month. So I'm currently 3-0. And at this point, I was actually the only person that was 3-0 in this tournament. But the finals are going to be against J-Rob and Stacks. shout out to J Robin Stacks. He actually streams on Twitch now, streams some PvP content and his Stardust grind sessions. So go check him out over on Twitch. Against his team, I feel that Poliwrath, Charizard, and Noctowl, so my Poliwrath double flyer core is going to be my key to success here. Looking at his team, Poliwrath is going to have favorable matchups against his Marshtomp, his Altaria, and his Empoleon. And honestly, in that Escavalier matchup, if I can do some fancy shield baits, I can come out of that with a victory as well. But I do need to look out for the aerial ace that his Escavalier is most likely running. So that is the team that I constructed there, and I ran double flyer as well because it's going to give me coverage against that Venusaur, something that I know that I'm very weak to. And the Charizard is going to give me coverage against his Escavalier and his Alolan Ninetales, but it's going to be walled pretty hard by his Marshtomp and his Empoleon, so I'm going to have to watch out for that. He's got his Alolan Ninetales on my Noctowl here, and this is just pure charm down. Even though I have these two shields, it's going to be pretty rough. This charm damage is going to be pretty rough. I do take out the Ninetales there, but out comes the Escavalier, and his raw counter damage is really putting some work into my Noctowl because it's hitting me for neutral. I miss a bubble there. It doesn't matter, though. It probably would have taken him out anyways. In comes my Poliwrath. I was really hoping to immediately catch a charge move and not let him farm up any more energy. But that did not happen, and now he's actually going to be able to throw back-to-back aerial aces. I don't have enough energy stored in my Noctowl to throw another Sky Attack, and so his counter damage is going to take me out. He takes that first game there. Now, I still like this line of 3, but I'm going to play it a little differently this time. Last time I swapped in my Charizard on his Escavalier, which I gave up my hardest counter right off the bat. So if he leads Escavalier again, I'm not going to do that. But he led Altaria this time, so this is a favorable scenario for me. I'm expecting the switch out. Out comes the Escavalier, and now this is really great. Now I can comfortably bring in my Charizard. I'm okay getting hit by whatever this is going to be, probably an aerial ace. Doesn't do that much damage, and the Fire Spins will be able to take him out before he can get to another charge move. I'm expecting the Altaria to come back out. He brings in Empoleon. Holy cow. So I'm just going to go straight Blast Burn here. Even though I farmed all this energy, the waterfall damage is so insane. And he thought that I was going to bait him there, so I'm actually able to land the Blast Burn, which is really favorable for me. Poliwrath is going to be able to come in. I can comfortably tank anything that Empoleon throws at me, but I'm actually able to fast move him down. And now this is pretty much a good game here because of the two shields that I have and this stored energy. I'm going to be able to put on this Ice Punch pressure, and it's going to be able to take out the Altaria. Again, 2 Ice Punches does the trick, and even though he has 2 shields, the Dragon Breath damage is not going to be potent enough to take me out. Lag a little bit here, but it's good game anyways. So he just lets it go. Going into the 3rd round, I'm going to still run the same exact line of 3. I feel like this is really the safest line for me. So if I can play this correctly, I'm going to feel confident with the matchups. He leads Escavalier. Okay, let's see how I play this differently from the first match. I'm going to switch in my Noctowl instead of my Charizard. And this baits out the Empoleon, which is exactly what I wanted to have happen because I don't want the Empoleon matched up against my Charizard. So I was able to bait out the Empoleon, and honestly, I'm not going to shield any of these attacks because I'm going to be able to bring in Poliwrath back in and soak up all of the energy that he's going to farm with his Empoleon. These Sky Attacks are still doing a decent amount of damage. Empoleon is not super tanky, so he lets it go. Correct play on his part. He's got a lot of energy stored up, but again, Poliwrath is going to come in and soak all of that up. Definitely don't want to bring in Charizard here. I'm expecting this to be a Hydro Cannon. I am going to let it go through. Even the Flash Cannon I would resist. And I'm able to farm him down just a little bit, but he had very low amount of health. I expected the Escavalier to come back in, and so he switches it out right away, and we get this visual bug again where his Pokemon's invisible. But if you look in the top right hand of the screen, it says that his Altaria is currently in. So I need to put on a lot of Dragon Claw pressure against this Altaria. My Poliwrath still has some stored energy, but I'm going to need to land a Dynamic Punch on that Escavalier because my Charizard did not take it as low as I wanted it to. I am outpacing this Altaria to get to these Dragon Claws, but if he Dragon Breath farms me down, then it's going to be game over. It looks like we actually CMP tied there, and so he was forced to throw his Sky Attack. I still have a shield. I want to keep this Poliwrath as healthy as possible, and I don't want to have to commit the second shield, because these counters from Escavalier are going to do a lot of damage. I'm going for the Dynamic Punch here. Let's see if it's enough to take out his Escavalier. Barely enough, and I'm able to take that game. So this allowed me to sweep the tournament 4-0. Good games, everyone, that I played in here. Go Battle League is now out, and so I'll be putting out some Go Battle League videos. So stay tuned for that. Hopefully this video helps everyone get a little bit of a look into my mind on how I construct my lines of 3 and how I read my opponent's team. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.